In the city of Compton, California, a place immortalized in hip-hop as both a battlefield of hardship and a cradle of creativity, a child was born on June 17, 1987, who would come to redefine the very meaning of rap. His name was Kendrick Lamar Duckworth, and his story began like countless others in neighborhoods marked by systemic neglect and simmering violence. But his voice would eventually rise far beyond the streets that shaped him. Compton in the late 80s and 90s was a paradox. On one hand, it was plagued by gang wars, crack epidemics, and the heavy presence of helicopters circling above as symbols of constant surveillance. On the other, it was a place where resilience, ingenuity, and art blossomed in defiance of despair. In this crucible, Kendrick's earliest memories were not just of danger, but also of inspiration. Like the day he watched Tupac Shakur and Dr. Dre film the legendary video for California Love, right in his own neighborhood. That moment planted a seed in the mind of a wide-eyed boy who realized music could be more than entertainment. It could be survival, it could be storytelling, it could be truth itself. Unlike many children of Compton who found temporary escape through rebellion, Kendrick turned inward, cultivating a sensitivity to language, rhythm, and the unspoken emotions of his surroundings. Quiet, observant, almost shy, he wrote poetry and lyrics in notebooks long before anyone outside his block would know his name. His journey was not destined to be easy, but it would be one of transformation, where the pain of his city became the fuel for an artistic genius that the world had never before encountered. And from those cracked pavements of Compton would emerge a voice so profound, it would one day echo across continents as a symbol of hope, resistance, and reinvention. As Kendrick entered his teenage years, the atmosphere of Compton pressed down on him with its dual weight of danger and inspiration. Violence was never far away, and friends he grew up with were often pulled into cycles of gangs and hustling. Yet Kendrick, quiet and deliberate, found another path. Writing became his refuge, and rhymes became his weapon, the pages of his notebooks filling with reflections on what he saw and what he felt but rarely said aloud. By the time he was a young teenager, he was already recording under the alias m.A.A.d, releasing mixtapes that circulated through the underground rap scene of Los Angeles. His voice was distinct, not only for its technical precision, but for the emotional gravity that seemed unusual in someone so young. While many aspiring rappers glorified the harsh realities around them, Kendrick dissected them, exposing their complexity and their costs. In 2004, when he was only 16, he released his first mixtape, Youngest Head Nigga in Charge, which, though raw, caught the attention of local circles. It demonstrated that this young artist was not just another voice chasing fame. He was a craftsman shaping narratives from lived reality. Soon after, he joined forces with Top Dog Entertainment, the independent label that would become his creative home and family. Under TD's mentorship, Kendrick honed his craft, expanding his lyrical scope while maintaining the authenticity that set him apart. Each verse carried the perspective of an observer living amid chaos, yet refusing to be consumed by it. This stage of his life, where youthful experimentation met sharpened intent, laid the foundation for a career that would eventually transform him from m.A.A.d, the talented kid from Compton, into Kendrick Lamar, one of the most important voices of a generation. By the end of the 2000s, Kendrick Lamar was emerging as an undeniable force, distinguished not by bravado, but by his ability to weave personal confession with larger social commentary. His mixtape, Overly Dedicated in 2010, marked a critical turning point, earning him wider recognition for both his lyrical ability and his depth. Songs like Ignorance is Bliss revealed his dual vision. He could describe street life vividly, but always carried a layer of critique, questioning whether violence and ambition were truly paths to freedom or traps disguised as choices. That ability to stand both inside and outside the world he described gave Kendrick a unique authority. He was not merely a product of Compton, he was also its analyst and its critic. The following year, His independently released album section, .A.D, further cemented his reputation. It was ambitious, tackling generational struggles, institutional racism, and the lingering scars of poverty and addiction. Critics praised it as a bold debut, and it quickly became a cult classic, especially among listeners searching for a rapper whose storytelling carried moral weight. Beyond the music itself, the release of Section .A.D marked Kendrick's arrival as a leader of TD's roster, a movement that also included future stars like Schoolboy Q, Ab-Soul, and J-Rock. Together, they represented a new wave of West Coast rap, less obsessed with gangster mythology and more invested in painting layered portraits of modern black life. What made Kendrick stand out even within that powerful collective was the sheer scope of his imagination. He could write as himself, as his community, or as symbolic characters embodying universal struggles. This marked the beginning of his transformation from underground talent to mainstream artist, setting the stage for the major label debut that would elevate him to a global icon. The world truly began to pay attention when Kendrick Lamar released Good Kid, m.A.A.d, in October 2012, his first major label album under Interscope and Aftermath. Marketed as a short film by Kendrick Lamar, the project was more than music. It was an autobiographical journey told with cinematic precision. Across its tracks, Kendrick narrated his adolescence in Compton, weaving a coming-of-age story shaped by peer pressure, family guidance, and the looming presence of violence. Songs like Shireen aka Master Splinter's Daughter introduced listeners to youthful temptation, while Swimming Pools, Drank critiqued the culture of alcohol abuse disguised as party anthems. The album's narrative arc culminated in moments of spiritual awakening, particularly in Sing About Me, I'm Dying of Thirst, where Lamar reflected on mortality, legacy, and redemption with a weight rarely heard in mainstream rap. Critics hailed the album as a masterpiece of storytelling, praising its ability to merge personal vulnerability with universal themes. Commercially, it was a success, debuting at number 2 on the Billboard 200 and eventually going triple platinum, while singles like Poetic Justice featuring Drake gained massive airplay. Yet what separated Good Kid, m.A.A.d from its peers was its cohesive narrative, a rarity in an era dominated by singles. Kendrick had announced himself not just as a rapper with hits, but as an artist with vision. He was proving that hip-hop could still be a vehicle for complex storytelling. And in doing so, he set the bar for what rap albums could achieve in the 21st century. If Good Kid, m.A.A.d proved Kendrick Lamar was a gifted storyteller, his 2015 follow-up, To Pimp a Butterfly, transformed him into a cultural prophet. Where his debut had leaned on linear narrative, this new project exploded with ambition, weaving jazz, funk, soul, and spoken word into a soundscape unlike anything hip-hop had previously embraced. Produced alongside Flying Lotus, Thundercat, George Clinton, and Kamasi Washington, the album was at once sonically daring and politically urgent. From the opening track, Wesley's Theory, which framed fame as both opportunity and trap, to the blistering fury of the Blacker the Berry, Kendrick confronted race, power, and identity with devastating honesty. Yet amid the pain and critique, there was hope. All Right soared as a defiant anthem that would echo in the streets as protesters chanted its refrain, declaring resilience against oppression. The album's interludes and recurring poem to Tupac stitched together its sprawling themes, turning the record into an existential dialogue between generations. Upon release, critics hailed To Pimp a Butterfly as one of the greatest albums ever made, praising its innovation and depth. It debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200, proving that uncompromising art could still thrive in a commercial landscape. But its true legacy was cultural. It became required reading in universities, quoted in political rallies, and embraced as a soundtrack of empowerment. In pushing hip-hop to its experimental limits, Kendrick didn't just break barriers, he elevated the genre into the realm of fine art, solidifying himself as a voice for history. By 2017, anticipation for Kendrick's next move had reached fever pitch, and when Damn arrived, it confirmed once again his ability to reinvent himself while commanding both mainstream and critical respect. Where To Pimp a Butterfly was sprawling and experimental, Damn was leaner, more direct, and yet just as profound, balancing radio-friendly hits with theological meditations. The album's structure was famously designed to function in reverse, meaning listeners could play it backward for a mirrored narrative, a bold experiment that invited endless interpretation. Tracks like Humble dominated charts with its booming bass and brash self-reflection, while DNA showcased Kendrick's explosive technical prowess, his voice bending and breaking as if embodying the chaos of identity itself. Fear and Loyalty revealed his vulnerability and complexity, navigating themes of morality, family, loyalty, and mortality. The critical response was rapturous, applauding Kendrick's ability to craft an album that was both commercially dominant and intellectually dense. The cultural impact reached a new height in 2018 when Kendrick became the first non-classical, non-jazz artist to win the Pulitzer Prize for music. The Pulitzer Committee praised Damn as a virtuosic song collection unified by vernacular authenticity and rhythmic dynamism, validating hip-hop as high art in the eyes of traditional institutions. This recognition did not simply crown Kendrick's achievement. It represented a seismic shift in how rap itself was perceived, lifting it from the margins of pop culture to the pinnacle of artistic recognition. With Damn, Kendrick Lamar was no longer just the best rapper alive. He was an artist shaping the very definition of modern music. The Pulitzer Prize win for Damn in 2018 was more than just a personal achievement for Kendrick Lamar. It was a cultural earthquake. For decades, hip-hop had been dismissed by traditional institutions as too raw, too vulgar, too street to be considered alongside classical symphonies or jazz compositions. Yet here was a Compton-born rapper whose work chronicled violence, faith, systemic oppression, and redemption, standing on equal ground with the so-called high arts. Critics noted that the award marked a turning point in cultural legitimacy, validating what millions of listeners already knew. Hip-hop was America's most vital art form, and Kendrick was its most profound practitioner. The victory reverberated across communities, particularly among young black artists who saw in Kendrick proof that their stories could ascend to the highest levels of recognition. But Kendrick himself responded with humility, rarely boasting about the honor, and instead continuing to emphasize the collective struggles his music represented. His tours during this period reflected his growing stature. The Damn tour was both a global spectacle and an intimate confessional, filled with visual storytelling, martial arts-inspired choreography, and spiritual overtones. He was no longer performing as just a rapper, but as a cultural architect, using the stage to bridge entertainment with enlightenment. The Pulitzer moment crystallized his dual identity. Kendrick Lamar was at once the voice of the marginalized and a global icon, capable of speaking to the oppressed while commanding respect from the world's most powerful cultural institutions. After the monumental success of Damn, the world waited with bated breath to see how Kendrick Lamar would follow such triumph. The answer arrived in 2022 with Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, a deeply personal double album that shifted focus from external struggles to internal battles. Across its sprawling tracks, Kendrick confronted generational trauma, cycles of abuse, the complexities of fatherhood, and the burdens of fame. Unlike his earlier projects that spoke with prophetic certainty, Mr. Morale carried a raw vulnerability, exposing cracks in the armor of a man often hailed as invincible. On songs like United in Grief, Kendrick revealed the weight of carrying collective pain, while Mother I Sober became one of his most devastatingly honest confessions, addressing abuse and silence within families. The production, experimental yet sparse, forced listeners to dwell on the words, the silences, the discomfort. Many critics called it his most difficult album, not because it lacked brilliance, but because it demanded empathy rather than admiration. It was an act of courage, a global icon at the height of power, choosing to reveal his fragility rather than his dominance. Commercially successful, the album nonetheless divided audiences, with some praising its honesty and others struggling with its density. But over time, Mr. M.A.A.d and the Big Steppers has been recognized as a milestone, proof that true artistry means risk. Kendrick was no longer simply narrating the world's struggles. He was daring to narrate his own, reminding audiences that even prophets bleed and even leaders stumble. By the time Mr. M.A.A.d and the Big Steppers had made its mark, Kendrick Lamar was firmly established not only as a musician, but as a cultural leader whose influence transcended entertainment. His lyrics had become academic texts, studied in universities alongside great works of literature. His performances had become political theater, staged on platforms as grand as the Super Bowl halftime show, where his presence symbolized hip-hop's full arrival into mainstream cultural legitimacy. Yet beyond awards and accolades, what made Kendrick so influential was the moral weight of his voice. Songs like Alright had been chanted in the streets by protesters demanding racial justice, while The Blacker the Berry sparked difficult conversations about internalized oppression and systemic violence. He was an artist who did not flinch from discomfort, forcing audiences to confront truths they might otherwise avoid. More than a rapper, he became a kind of griot for the modern age, preserving history, critiquing power, and offering visions of resilience. Within hip-hop culture, his example reshaped expectations. Younger artists saw in Kendrick proof that commercial success did not require artistic compromise, and that one could be radical, experimental, and honest while still reaching millions. Globally, he was seen as a rare figure who merged pop stardom with intellectual gravitas, bridging communities across class, race, and geography. In every sense, Kendrick Lamar was no longer merely narrating the story of his life or his city. He had become a narrator of the human condition itself, a voice echoing across generations. To understand Kendrick Lamar's artistry is to recognize how deeply he embeds his social critique within the fabric of his music, blending personal narrative with sweeping social analysis in a way that feels both raw and transcendent. Unlike many rappers who rely on surface-level bravado or catchy hooks, Kendrick uses his pen as a scalpel, dissecting the wounds of his community and exposing the infections of systemic racism, poverty, and trauma that often fester beneath the surface of American life. His lyrics are rich with biblical imagery, historical references, and layers of psychological conflict, making his verses function like parables meant to provoke reflection as much as admiration. On The Blacker the Berry, he embodies righteous fury, holding a mirror to society's hypocrisies, while Alright transforms collective suffering into a cry of hope, destined to reverberate through protest marches across the nation. This paradox between despair and hope, destruction and redemption, defines his creative power. Kendrick never glorifies the struggles of Compton, yet he refuses to deny their humanity, offering listeners a perspective that is unsparing in its honesty, yet unshakable in its faith. Each song becomes a meditation on survival, dignity, and morality, and in demanding that listeners wrestle with difficult truths, Kendrick elevates rap into a form of philosophy, proving it can illuminate society's darkest corners just as powerfully as literature, scripture, or film. What sets Kendrick Lamar apart within the crowded landscape of contemporary hip-hop is his uncanny ability to merge the vulnerability of individual confession with the weight of collective struggle, creating art that resonates as both intimate diary and historical testimony. When he admits to doubt, temptation, or fear, these confessions never stand in isolation. Instead, they connect to broader questions of race, identity, and survival in America. In Sing About Me, I'm Dying of Thirst, his reflection on mortality is not just a personal meditation, but a commentary on the cycles of violence that cut young Black lives short, transforming grief into generational trauma. In Mother I Sober, one of his most painfully honest tracks, he breaks the silence surrounding abuse, revealing how silence itself perpetuates pain. By weaving his own wounds into the fabric of collective experience, Kendrick shifts the role of the rapper from entertainer to griot, a cultural historian tasked with preserving memory and challenging power. This approach redefines the possibilities of hip-hop, showing that rap can be as layered and demanding as any great novel, poem, or philosophical text. For younger artists, his work is a beacon, proving that authenticity and experimentation can coexist with commercial success. For listeners, his music becomes both mirror and medicine, inviting self-reflection while also insisting on societal transformation. In this synthesis of personal and political, Kendrick crafts a body of work that refuses passivity. It demands engagement, interpretation, and above all, empathy. The cultural significance of Kendrick Lamar extends beyond albums and accolades. It resides in a way his music reshapes public discourse and fuels collective imagination. In 2015 and beyond, as protests erupted in cities across America after police killings of unarmed Black men, the chant "We Gon' Be Alright" surged from the streets, echoing the chorus of his anthem from To Pimp a Butterfly. In that moment, a piece of art transcended its origins, becoming political expression, solidarity, and even therapy for those demanding justice. Few artists achieve this alchemy, the ability to convert sound into movement, lyric into lifeline. Kendrick belongs to a lineage of activist artists like Nina Simone and Gil Scott-Heron, voices inseparable from their times, yet his reach extends further, amplified by the digital age. Universities teach his albums as texts of theology, history, and race, analyzing his storytelling with the seriousness of canonical literature. Meanwhile, his appearances on mainstream stages, from the Grammys to the Super Bowl halftime show, carry subversive weight, forcing conversations about race and inequality into spaces that often prefer silence. In bridging protest and performance, grassroots and mainstream, Kendrick functions as a cultural mediator who makes America confront what it would rather ignore. His presence affirms that hip-hop is not a genre on the margins, but the pulse of modern consciousness, a heartbeat that insists on being heard. And through him, that pulse beats louder, sharper, and with undeniable truth. Kendrick Lamar's influence on the broader culture of hip-hop cannot be overstated. In an era when rap often risks being consumed as disposable content, Kendrick's body of work stands as a defiant reminder that the genre can serve as a profound cultural archive. His meticulous attention to structure, theme, and narrative coherence has redefined the expectations of what a rap album can be, inspiring a generation of younger artists to treat their craft with similar seriousness. Figures like J. Cole, Joey Badass, and No Name cite his influence, not just in sound, but in artistic intention, the pursuit of truth rather than trend. Beyond his peers, Kendrick has reshaped the expectations of listeners themselves. Audiences who once demanded instant gratification have learned, through his albums, to value patience, complexity, and depth. Fans debate his lyrics with the intensity once reserved for literature classes, combing through symbolism and metaphor, uncovering layers of meaning that reveal themselves only after repeated listens. His example proves that commercial success and uncompromising artistry are not mutually exclusive. By elevating the bar, he has forced hip-hop culture to look inward, asking whether the genre will chase profit or embrace purpose. In many ways, Kendrick's rise is less about one man and more about a movement. The reclamation of rap as art, as philosophy, as testimony. Through his career, he has rewritten the rules, showing that even in a world that rewards the shallow, depth still matters, and the truth still resonates. Yet Kendrick Lamar's genius extends beyond his technical mastery or even his social commentary. It lies in his ability to embody contradictions, to stand at the crossroads of vulnerability and strength, despair and hope, rebellion and faith. He is at once the young boy from Compton haunted by the dangers of his neighborhood, and the Pulitzer Prize laureate recognized by the most prestigious cultural institutions. He is both prophet and penitent, calling out the sins of society while confessing his own. This duality allows his music to resonate across divides, appealing to those in the streets who recognize their lives in his verses and to those in universities who dissect his work as literature. He occupies spaces that rarely overlap, a mainstream superstar who resists commodification, a spiritual thinker unafraid of doubt, a political voice who avoids becoming partisan propaganda. By refusing to simplify himself, Kendrick invites his listeners to embrace complexity within themselves. His performances echo this same ethos, blending theatricality with meditation, using visuals, choreography, and silence as much as sound. In every medium, he insists that art should not comfort alone but challenge, provoke, and unsettle. He has become less of an entertainer and more of a cultural compass, pointing not toward easy answers but toward deeper questions. And in a world oversaturated with noise, Kendrick Lamar's willingness to pause, to reflect, and to wrestle with contradiction may be his most radical act of all. As we reflect on Kendrick Lamar's journey, the arc of his life and art reads like a parable of transformation, beginning in the streets of Compton and extending to the global stage where his voice carries the weight of generations. From a child inspired by Tupac's presence in his neighborhood, to K.Dot's scribbling verses in notebooks, to the architect of Good Kid, Mad City's cinematic storytelling, to the prophet of To Pimp, a Butterfly, to the Pulitzer-winning poet of Damn, and finally to the vulnerable seeker of Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, Kendrick has continually redefined what it means to be a rapper, an artist, and a cultural leader. His legacy is not measured only in Grammys or sales, but in how his music reshaped public consciousness, how it gave language to protest, comfort to the grieving, and vision to the unheard. He has proven that hip-hop is not merely entertainment, but one of the most powerful tools of truth-telling in modern history. And yet, Kendrick's story is far from finished. If his career thus far has taught us anything, it is that he thrives on evolution, on moving beyond the expectations of the world around him. He remains a reminder that greatness is not perfection but courage. The courage to speak when silence is safer, to create when imitation is easier, to confront when escape is tempting. In the end, Kendrick Lamar is not only one of the greatest rappers alive, he is a living testament to the power of art to heal, to challenge, and to transform a human spirit. As Kendrick Lamar moves further into the future, his story continues to unfold not simply as a career, but as a living dialogue with the times. Unlike many artists who peak and plateau, Kendrick reinvents himself with each chapter, challenging his audience to grow alongside him. His collaborations outside traditional hip-hop, whether with rock, jazz, R&B, or global artists, signal a restless curiosity, a refusal to be confined by labels or expectations. In curating the Black Panther soundtrack, he expanded his artistry into cinema, crafting music that resonated with themes of heritage, power, and diaspora, proving that his vision could shape not just albums but cultural phenomena. His forays into visual art, poetry, and experimental performances suggest that Kendrick sees his role less as a musician and more as a multidisciplinary storyteller, always seeking new languages to articulate truth. Even in silence, he commands attention. His rare absences from the spotlight amplify the sense that when he does speak, it matters. Fans wait not merely for music, but for revelations, for the next chapter of a journey that reflects the evolution of a generation. This enduring anticipation reveals that Kendrick Lamar has transcended celebrity. He is not only a star, but a symbol, embodying resilience, reflection, and the unyielding pursuit of authenticity. Looking at Kendrick Lamar's trajectory, it becomes clear that his true legacy will be measured not only by awards or sales, but by the transformation he sparked within culture itself. He showed that hip-hop, often dismissed as fleeting or dangerous, could stand as a legitimate art form equal to any discipline in shaping hearts and minds. More importantly, he proved that authenticity could coexist with global reach, that one could speak unflinchingly about pain, injustice, and vulnerability while still moving millions of listeners worldwide. In this way, Kendrick has given permission to countless others to embrace complexity, to resist compromise, and to see their own stories as worthy of poetry. His art stands as a reminder that greatness is not found in avoiding discomfort, but in diving directly into it, drawing meaning from struggle and dignity from despair. For generations to come, his music will echo as both testimony and prophecy, a record of one man's life and a mirror of an entire society's journey. Kendrick Lamar is more than the sum of his albums, more than a rapper, more than a cultural icon. He is living proof that art can be a vessel for truth, a sanctuary for the oppressed, and a compass for the lost. And as his voice continues to evolve, one truth will endure. Through sound and story, Kendrick has forever changed the way we hear not just hip-hop, but the human condition itself.